Hi, hello everyone. We're meeting to have a little chat about traditional European medicine. What is it? What is some of its history? Who are some important main players? What are some of its pillars? And what are some of its therapies? Um, this will be a shorter talk than usual. We'll have some time for the ritual after. Yeah, so settle in, get something to take some notes if you'd like. Yeah, we'll jump right in. One little disclaimer I would like to say is there's a lot to say about this. Yeah. All right, so what is traditional European medicine? Traditional European medicine is really an all-round medical system that's existed and developed over several thousands of years. It's really comprehensive, it's really diverse, which makes it really integrated and, of course, holistic. It focuses on the healing of the whole person. So that includes, of course, the body and the mind, but also the soul and the spirit and the environment and the social life, which is what, some systems may not include. It's very important to note there is no dogma in traditional European medicine, TEM for short, just like you have TCM for traditional Chinese medicine for short. We say TEM for traditional European medicine. So TEM is like a big mother tree with a lot of different branches, just like you are and just like life is, right? We have kind of a core, an essence, but then we have all these different things we're interested in, these different things that we're doing. So same as in these different thoughts that we have throughout our lives, different phases. It's the same with TEM. So there's a lot of developments and traditions and streams and styles in TEM. And it's basically up to everybody's unique situation, either the practitioner, but specifically of the one who's looking for support in a specific phase that they may be going through in their life that works best for them. And in some cases, it also kind of depends on what somebody might be open to. Yeah. So very diverse, and I'll just touch on some different parts of traditional European medicine inside of this little talk. So one really important thing I would love to mention is very often when we speak of traditional medicine, people put it under the word of alternative medicine, right? And I find it really important to not use that word alternative because it implies that you would be able to replace modern medicine. Some people also mix up in the words, and for modern medicine, they say traditional medicine because it's kind of what's classic, right? It's kind of that's what everybody does. It's traditional, it's normal, not new or old, right? But that's wrong wording. So we have modern medicine and we have traditional medicine, right? And so when we say alternative medicine, there's the implication that traditional medicine is a replacement of modern medicine, or that modern medicine could be a replacement of traditional medicine. And this does not make any sense because traditional medicine and modern medicine, they have different functions and they have different intentions. And honestly, I really look forward to a world where both traditional medicine and modern medicine can support each other and fill each other in where the other one falls a little bit short. So instead of using the word alternative, I invite you to use the word complementary. So you can understand traditional medicine as a complement to modern medicine, or modern medicine as a complement to traditional medicine, right? There's no need to be at a war or a stride between the two, which of course is very active and happening today in a lot of different, areas of life, but so of course also in medicine. So just changing our wording, just you and me changing our wording from alternative to complementary is already kind of breeding ground for more peace within the medical field in our world. So invitation of relative importance. So traditional medicine and all of its branches, right, focus on the root healing in a holistic way of a person or an animal, sometimes also a place or a group, a family, right? Depends on who's asking for support. And of course, because it focuses on root healing, they kind of have to, the practitioner needs to get a little bit of it in detective mode. because there's so many variables inside of this whole person, right? This can be rather complex and it can take time. And it requires the active participation of the person who is seeking balance, well-being, and fulfillment in their lives. So this is already one very important difference with modern medicine. Modern medicine does not always seek the active participation of the patient. We don't use the word patient. In traditional medicine, that's mainly for modern political legislation reasons, but it's important to say. Yeah, so modern medicine, of course, will rather, which is why it's also interesting for a lot of people, will rather just get the job done, and the person, the patient asking for support can just sit back, take the pill, and the rest will be taken care of, right? The doc will solve my problems. This doesn't happen in a natural approach or in a traditional approach. So this is very important. The person's responsibility is vital, is so essential, right? Because so much about traditional medicine is self-healing, essentially, and the practitioner is just giving impulses. Yeah, so modern medicine and all its branches, because it has a lot of different branches too, rather focuses on reducing acute symptoms, right? And often removing problem areas rather than focusing on the root, removing problem areas. For example, with antibiotics, right, we have a problem infection through this strain of bacteria, so we will remove it, we will kill it, right, through antibiotics. Or, of course, surgery will cut out a tumor, will cut out a growth, will cut out, in some cases, even an organ or a limb, whatever the case may be, right? So that's often also an important focus on modern medicine that is not covered as much by traditional medicine, definitely not the way that it's practiced today. Of course, this approach of modern medicine has been extremely life-saving in a lot of cases. And in those cases, you would not necessarily want to substitute it with traditional medicine. So traditional medicine works best when time is on its side and when it's integrated into daily life. So you could understand traditional medicine as a lifestyle as well, which is the most ideal way to go about it. Which means it has a very strong preventative approach, right? So a healthy person can go to see a traditional medicine practitioner to make sure that they know what diet fits for them, know what lifestyle fits for them, know what herbs or plants that they could take when they feel a little bit off, right? Those are all preventative measures that would perhaps avoid a person needing to go through more extreme measures with modern medicine. So it's very important for prevention, right? So when somebody has, for example, a stage 2, 3, or 4 cancer, that really may truly be too late to get going with more traditional approaches, right? And this is where we can be really grateful to modern medicine. So modern medicine is built, also this whole system around it from the hospitals and the insurances and all of that. It's built to diagnose problems when they've already gotten quite out of balance, like quite strongly out of balance. So they're already quite advanced, right? Whereas, as I said before, traditional medicine can diagnose when the whole system is off constitutionally. I'll explain what constitutional means a little bit more later on. When a system can be off constitutionally, which can be the case before symptoms start really showing in more acute ways or more advanced ways. When somebody's liver is in overdrive, for example, through excess heat, just one very simple example, or if their gut their gut health may be troubling them because they're ingesting foods that are not fit to their system, then modern medicine may not see a problem because nothing is showing up on tests. That happens to quite a few people. And then sometimes they have to resort to say, well, it's psychosomatic, right? And sometimes things might be psychosomatic, at least partly, yeah? But in traditional medicine, right, because modern medicine focuses on the tests, kind of the empirical data of seeing a test, what the numbers are of someone's system that shows up on those tests, or what they see in X-rays or in MRIs or these kinds of things. And what is happening constitutionally with a person is not seen. Essentially, it's the humors, it's these invisible juices, is what they're called. The humors are called juices, or the elements, essentially, that are acting through us, all the time. And they can do that in balanced ways or in less balanced ways. And that can be seen by a traditional medicine practitioner through the diagnosis of the tongue or the palms or the tone of voice. Or, of course, what's very important in traditional medicine is the anamnesis, which means really taking the time to listen, truly listen, completely, holistically listen to what somebody is telling you and how they feel. That means, yes, you're listening to their words, but you're also, as I said, listening to their tone of voice. You're listening to their body language. You're listening to the way in which they come to you. Everything that they are doing is a communication about their health. So you know what I mean about the detective mode? That's definitely part of being the traditional medicine practitioner. And this is, of course, again, very helpful in spotting misbalances early on before they have to get into an advanced state for which we might need modern medicine to take more extreme measures. Yeah. This is just a little talk around why it would be great to be able to use these two systems in unison with each other, right? So traditional medicine is not an alternative to modern medicine in acute cases, like some examples that I mentioned, far evolved cancers, for example, or gravely, profoundly infested limbs or whatever. Leave it to the modern medicine practitioner. But of course, traditional medicine can form a great complement to modern medicine, and sometimes in less intense cases can of course also form a standalone support to support somebody in living an inspired and a fulfilled and a balanced life. So one thing that also warrants saying, because of the politics of big pharma, which I won't get into here, unfortunately, there's a lot of propaganda about traditional medicine not being effective, right? This is, of course, because modern medicine measures according to modern medicine's rules. And through this empirical and purely objective materialist lens, cannot grasp the tools, the overarching structure, philosophy, and logic of traditional medicine, and therefore, unfortunately, in a lot of cases, throws the baby out with the bathwater. Also, it's very difficult to do generalized, standardized tests, which is needed in order to prove something is effective in modern science or modern medicine. With a lot of people, because traditional medicine really sees the uniqueness of every single individual. So it's very difficult to apply one size fits all remedy or therapy to some people who are suffering from similar symptoms, because in traditional medicine, you will almost never do that. You will always formulate the therapy specifically to the uniqueness of this specific individual in front of you. So it's very difficult to do tests in the framework of modern science, so modern medicine, in order to be able to prove the efficiency of these remedies. So yeah, of course, then modern medicine can throw traditional medicine away as well. It's not effective. There's no scientific results that prove that it is effective. But of course, if traditional and modern medicine could be open to each other and be open to filling each other in wherever necessary, then in the end, everybody, mainly people who are seeking support and health, sustained and deep health, would be better off. So technically, it is good practice to ask your modern medicine doctor their advice about your traditional medicine, about whatever it is that your traditional medicine practitioner may have advised you to do or to take. That is good practice. However, because of this current political situation of, unfortunately, opposition, like we see in a lot of the world at the moment, that's often very hard to do. As the modern medicine practitioner, of course, they're definitely not all like that. There's some people who are open to it, and that's fantastic. More power to them. So in some cases, they may simply say, no, this will not work, and then will persuade somebody to go off whatever it is that the other natural remedy may have been. So we have a lot of work to do on this level to find peace together, essentially, so that ultimately everybody can receive better and more efficient and more wholesome and respectful care. Yeah. All right. So traditional European medicine, what are its origins? Where did it start? So, like I said, a couple thousand years ago in ancient Greece, with a bunch of different figures, but some standout ones are Galen, Hippocrates, often called the father of medicine, Aristotle, and Theophrastus. So Galen, for example, he emphasized the importance of the humoral theory, which I'll explain a bit more in detail later, and bloodletting, and more. And Hippocrates strongly emphasized the importance of diet and lifestyle and environment in the factors of health. It was also, Hippocratic medicine was also founded strongly in the four humors. And the four humors are blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, creating the four constitutions of traditional European medicine. So in Hippocratic medicine, health was also believed to be a balance of those humors, these four juices, these four elements. And disease resulted, according to this, to Hippocrates, resulted from the imbalance of these humors. Then you have Aristotle and Theophrastus, and they emphasize the importance of observation and contemplation and induction, essentially leading to the systematic approach of natural science and also of modern science, right? The empirical observation is important. But in natural philosophy, before the time of the Enlightenment, that was also really important in the idea of reading the book of nature, right? So again, talking about this in-depth anamnesis, that you're really listening to somebody, you're reading them, you're reading their book, which is the book of nature. Then you have other important figures, for example, Hildegard von Bingen. I won't go into all of the figures as much. There's a lot to say about all of them, and much respect to all of these ones for their contributions. And then there's Paracelsus, who was a very controversial figure and still stays a very controversial figure. He also celebrated this in his lifestyle, in his lifetime. He was quite bombastic, I think, is what people say a lot about him. And there's some funny stories that you can read about some of his actions and behaviors. Yeah, definitely a rebel. Yeah, so his contributions really profoundly shaped and influenced the practice of Hermetic alchemy, which we'll talk about a little bit later, as he was an alchemist himself, more so than a modern pharmacist. He introduced the use of substances like mercury and sulfur and arsenic, moving away from the exclusive reliance on herbal and mineral remedies. So he emphasized the importance of chemistry in medicine, which is, of course, where modern pharmacology comes from too. And he popularized something which is called the doctrine of signatures, which suggests that certain physical characteristics of plants can indicate their therapeutic potential. So if a certain shape of a plant may look like a liver, or may look like lungs, or may look like a brain, or may look like a uterus, then you can read from this plant that it may have therapeutic potential for those organ systems. That's the doctrine of signatures and was popularized by Paracelsus. It's important to understand that Paracelsus, he introduced the use of chemistry in traditional European medicine from the perspective of an alchemist, not a chemist, and from somebody living in a time, not a chemist in the modern idea of what that means. And he was somebody living in the time before the Enlightenment and its consequent worldview of materialism, right? Enlightenment, I mean, as a philosophical and historical shift where empiricism and rationality and materialism became the most important values, basically, in understanding the world around us. And so he lived in a time before that, meaning he did not believe that disease was just a physical imbalance, which most modern chemists using chemistry in medicine do. But he was of the opinion that disease was also strongly, and health was also strongly influenced by spiritual and astral factors. And he wrote about that at length. And that those spiritual and astral influences also strongly affect the chemistry that happens in the lab. And all of that means he was an alchemist in the medieval sense of the word, rather than a modern chemist. In his time, saying he was a chemist would have been more correct, because we didn't have that idea yet that the spiritual, the unseen, and the astral factors were just removed, like we have in our current time and age, unfortunately. Yeah, and then you have figures like the Druids and the Volva. The Volva is the Germanic wise women, essentially, is what they're often called. So very little physical relics remain about the Druids and the Volva. But we can find some of this medicine in our fairy tales and our folk tales and our folk songs and some legends and some accounts. But basically, what was very important to them and how they contribute to the whole cooking pot, let's say, of traditional European medicine was the importance that they put on ritual and on creating direct relationship with the forces of nature. All right. So then we have the pillars of traditional European medicine. I mentioned a couple times already the elements and the humors, right? Humoral theory and constitutional therapy. So this is basically they're all interlinked. So we have the 4 humors or juices in traditional European medicine, creating the 4 constitutions. So first we have fire. And the juice or the humor of fire is called in traditional European medicine chole, which is yellow bile. And that creates, when that's very prominent and present in somebody, that creates the choleric constitution, which is hot and dry, just like fire. Then you have air. I should probably tell you them alphabetically according to the images here. Not alphabetically, but yeah, how they're here. So scrap that. Okay, we already spoke about choleric, which is the second one. So we'll go to the first one, which is sanguine, right? So this is air. Oh, cool. I was going to do that anyway. Yeah, so which is air, as you can also see in the image, right? This woman sitting on these clouds, airy, is air, and the juice is called sanguis, or blood, and the constitution is called sanguine, and it's warm and moist. So actually sanguine, which is often also why it's put as the first, is the most balanced, if you could say that, of all the constitutions, as in it has both warm and moist. So when someone has a sanguine constitution, actually they're often quite healthy, unless they really overdo it with the enjoyment, because they're often enjoying people. They love the good life and high quality food and all these things. And the only thing that they have to really take care of is just to not overdo things. But for the rest, they have quite a strong system because of this inherent balance of the constitution. And then we have the third that you see here is the phlegmatic. So that's the water principle. And the juice is phlegm or phlegma, right? So slime, basically. And this one is cold and moist. And then you have the last one, and that's the melancholic, and that's the earth, which is the black bile. So you have yellow bile, choleric, and black bile, which is a melancholic, which is cold and dry. So melancholic, it's often the very thin people who are sometimes also very pessimistic. They're not ones who are very full or very jovial or very expressive, that maybe choleric and sanguinic people might be more. But the melancholic people, they really know how to build reserves. But the funny thing is, because they know how to build reserves so well, whenever crisis strikes, they're the ones who are gonna be able to go for the longest amount of time because they've built so many reserves. But if it's not necessary, you probably won't see them moving very much. Yeah. So those are the main four constitutions. Maybe I say something still about the choleric constitution. They're people who are usually very muscular. They're the typical hunters. They're muscular, they're active, they're fiery. They're exactly what you imagine when you imagine fire. They're upwards, they're outwards, they're talking, they can get irritated quickly, they're motivated, they're driven, they're sporty, right? They speak like this. And then you have the phlegmatic person who's a lot slower, usually a little bit more wide because is also able to build up reserves well. Some people say the phlegmatic constitution developed or evolved during the Ice Age when you had just, a mammoth was available at a certain point, and then you ate a lot of that fatty meat and you had to store it. Right? So these people are often more set, they're also more slow, but they're very dependable, right? Because they're also building these reserves. So when it's necessary, they can also keep going. They have a long breath, long breath. Yeah. So as you can see, there's the four elements that are built in here, right? We have air with sanguine, we have fire with choleric, we have water with phlegma, and we have earth with the melancholic. So we have four elements, although some use the fifth element of ether in the understanding that nobody is purely one constitution. And that ether is the space in which somebody's unique combination of constitutions can come to be. So it can be helpful for you to know what your constitution is mainly, what it is on second, and then third and fourth are less important. They'll have less of an effect on your overall health, lifestyle, well-being, thoughts, all of that stuff, ambition, drive. But your first two are really helpful to know. I'm, for example, a mix between sanguine and choleric, which means I'm often warm. My winter jackets are often thin, and I can't really handle extreme heat outside very well. I grew up in the south of France, where it's pretty hot in the summer, and that didn't really work for me. But when I'm in colder climates, then great, because I have enough heat already from myself. But that also means, right, when something is really hot, of course, things dry out, right? So I have a tendency to dryness, which means that just as a part of my lifestyle, moistening plants like marshmallow root and licorice root, which is very tasty, are often plants that I make infusions out of just in order to support this balance. I know it's my weak point, the dryness, right? So I make sure that just in my cabinet, in my kitchen, I always have something which is moistening. Have it in the morning and great. And of course, also in diet and lifestyle, I know that I have to take breaks between activity. Otherwise, I can overheat, right? Go in overdrive, and then which allows you to, which means that you dry up even more. And in prolonged cases, of course, would create something like burnout. And that's exactly what it sounds like when you have too much heat going on, too much activity. It's never happened to me, but just as an example for you to understand. But of course, because I have the sanguinic also on my side, it's not so extreme, right? Because of that inherent balance of sanguinic. So this, if there's only one thing that you do according to traditional European medicine, I really recommend that you figure out what your constitution is, because you can base your lifestyle and your diet, but you can also understand what your strengths and what your weaknesses are, based on that, which is an incredible preventative measure for health in the long run. So yeah, of course, in Ayurveda and TCM, we see some similar things, right? So in Ayurveda, you have three main constitutions instead of four, like we have here, which are called the doshas. And you have five elements as well. They include ether, always. And in TCM, you have five, some people say nine constitutions. A lot is often a little bit more complicated in TCM. And you also have five elements, but they're slightly different. So you have water, earth, fire, right? Like we have in Europe and like they have in India. But you also have wood and metal. Some people say that you can understand wood as fire and metal as ether. but some don't agree and say it's something else entirely. So yeah. My experience taught me that it's important not to want to mix the systems too much. They're like languages. And if you want to say one sentence using three languages at the same time, you won't really get your point across. So if you want to mix these systems, I recommend that you resort to one system for a specific problem and perhaps get a second opinion with another system. And it could be that then after doing the whole logic, you end up with the same type of remedy, but it's important that the whole logic gets gets pushed along in from within the one system, right? All of these elements in these different medical systems are interwoven in complex ways. So you don't really want to just simplify them and take them out of context for the sake of comparison. Yeah, that's often also the problem of New Age, right? It's just cherry picking different things and creating one big simplified mess. Yeah, but the base assumption and the overarching philosophy of all of these systems is largely in harmony with each other, the overarching structure. And that's basically that the practitioner of a traditional medical system is the impulse giver in order for the person's being to be able to heal itself. So you're just triggering self-healing mechanisms, whether that's in the body, the mind, the spirit, the soul, the environment, the social structure, or all at the same time, doesn't matter. But it's very important for the practitioner to know that, right? It creates a completely different power dynamic than making the assumption, oh, I have all the answers. I'm going to tell them what they need to do. I'm going to make sure they do it. And which is take a pill, for example, modern medicine, and for the rest, that's it, right? And it's the pill that's working and not necessarily your innate self-healing capacities that are being that are rising up, right? Often with modern medicine, the pills are kind of overriding your own innate wisdom of your system. Not in all cases, there's definitely exceptions, but often so. So in traditional medicine systems, this is kind of overarching assumption. You can heal yourself. Sometimes you might just need a reminder or a little key to open the door again to that sense of inherent, innate well-being and balance, right? So there, all traditional medicine systems are in unison, in harmony with each other. There's an exception here. If somebody, for example, has a specific organ removed, then traditional medicine will also, just like modern medicine, will have to fill in the function of that organ through a prolonged and permanent supplementation. And there, basically, it will be the substance that then the person is taking that's doing the job. Yeah. All right, so there's different ways of diagnosis in traditional European medicine, and that also kind of goes in unison with the other systems. But we're talking about traditional European medicine today, so I'll just keep going with that. So pulse is very important. You have a lot of different layers of pulse, and you can tell a lot through the pulse. Depends on the practitioner whether they use it or not. Depends on the context. Online consultations, very difficult to do pulse reading. Then the iris. Iridology is the art of diagnosis through the iris. Then, of course, the tongue, which can be very helpful. And the urine, which personally I don't like. It's very smelly to have to cook people's urine. I've done it for a little while, but it's not so fun. There's other ways. And reflex zones, of course. So the palms, the feet, the back, the face. And then just the anamnesis, like I said before, really listening to somebody and observing them all the way through. And then there's, of course, their astrological chart, which I'm going to get into more a little bit later. And then the different types of therapies are, of course, herbs. Herbs is the one that has been used for the longest amount of time in traditional European medicine. It's a huge pillar, the herbs. It's huge and it's very complex, right? A lot of people think that herbalism is simple, and some things in herbalism are simple, right? And all of us can know. But it can get very complex, and it's good to know the complexity of it if you seriously want to work with it. It's fascinating. It's beautiful. But of course, herbs are not the only thing. It's also minerals and metals. It's very vast. And of course, it's been taken on by modern medicine too, right? Up to 70% of modern medicine is made from these components. They can have been then copied in the lab, or they can have been what do you call it, isolated, right? That's some of the active components within certain plants specifically, or mushrooms. And minerals have been isolated, and then basically the potency has been increased. So then you have something, yeah, that's what happens in a lot of modern pharmacology. But yeah, the majority of modern medicine comes from herbs, right? Yeah, and then of course you have diet. Diet is so important. Unfortunately, that's something that modern medicine really kind of doesn't take that seriously. So that's a huge pillar that this complement that I was speaking of would really benefit from. Yeah, diet, and often it's diet according to the constitution and according to the season. Yeah. So lifestyle, of course, is also really important. Again, according to the constitution and according to the cyclical nature of the world. So living with the cycle of the moon, which is quite popular today, tracking your moon cycle for women at least, but for men it's a little bit less popular, understandably, of course. But living with the cycle of the moon, all of the planets ideally, but definitely and most importantly, the seasons, right? Changing your diet according to the seasons, changing your lifestyle according to the seasons. Yeah. And then there's spiritual life, vital in traditional European medicine. So that means prayer is the more kind of medieval Christian name for it, or ritual, and or service, of course. It's a type of prayer and ritual. Then detoxification and fasting are really important. So we spoke about bloodletting before, that Galen was already 2000 years ago already really big on that. Bloodletting is still very big in traditional European medicine. It just gets complicated sometimes because in some countries, not all countries, but in some European countries, only doctors are allowed to do that, but they don't really, follow those practices. So something to know. So that's why also a lot of people use how do you say that in English? Those little worms, or those little animals. I forget the name for what the actual name of the animal is, but they're not bloodsuckers, but basically that's what they do, right? That's their role. So it's little animals you then put on your skin in certain specific spots. It's very important to know what the spots are, and preparation, and definitely support after that happens. It's very important after you put an animal like that on somebody's body. But that's a way to non-surgically, like without making an incision in somebody's skin, which is usually reserved for modern medicine these days, to do the age-old practice of bloodletting, which really detoxifies, cleans, and purifies the system. And sometimes that is really enough for somebody to heal again. Sometimes what a practitioner needs to do is allow the person to get out of their own way. And sometimes the things that we store over time are stored in our blood, and creating this tiny little incision, right, for the blood to just be able to flow can then create space for the person to generate new blood again and have enough vitality again to heal their own system, even if the symptom might be something completely seemingly unrelated, at least through a modern medical perspective. Yeah, then of course, somatic therapy. So anything to do with body work has also been very important in traditional European medicine. Acupressure, touch, massage, a lot of different forms of massage therapy. And then hydrotherapy, so therapy with water, therapy from very hot water to cold water, or just bathing, immersion in water, or walking in water, cold water baths, yeah, etc. And then there's the big topic of hermetic alchemy, which is unfortunately very misunderstood today. But I already touched on it a little bit earlier, in the understanding that Paracelsus, who was an alchemist and not a chemist in our modern understanding, he was in the lab whilst understanding the spiritual factors to be very, very real, right? that is not okay today, as in, okay, it's not a part of reality anymore within the structure of science today, which means alchemy just completely goes out of the picture. It's madness, right, for a lot of people. So of course the whole propaganda of, oh yeah, alchemists, they're just greedy people who want to get gold out of lead. Oh, that's why a lot of emperors and stuff hired them. There's actually a glimmer of truth to that. A lot of emperors did hire alchemists, and of course, as with everything and everywhere in humanity, there are some bad apples there who just use it for selfish purposes. But basically, alchemy is that it's chemistry, including the reality and the existence, the assumption of the existence, right? And so the co-creation of the existence of astral and spiritual forces. And in Hermetic alchemy, that's really often the planets. That's very important. So yeah, in alchemy, you have something called spagyrics. And those are essences, herbo-mineral and metallic essences, elixirs, and quintessences that are made according to a specific astrological time. So maybe you've heard of this dictum, as above, so below. So the archetype of certain planets correspond to the archetype found within certain plants and people and animals and places and all around nature, right? For example, a plant that stands strong and tall and might be spiky or sting and have resistant roots, have Martian, so from the planet Mars, correspondences. Mars, who's the warrior, right? The fighter. He's there, he's strong, he's, fighting with the spiky thing, the spiky characteristic. So when a person, for example, has little motivation or willpower, or they don't really know their values in life, one may understand from this perspective that they may lack in Martian correspondence and would do well on integrating a Martian spagyric and lifestyle. A Martian lifestyle would be something with a lot of movement, a lot of sports, kind of short, quick bursts of energy. Having clear goals. Those are all kind of Martian lifestyles. Yeah, so something can be made then with the Martian corresponding plant. Maybe you can think of what a Martian corresponding plant would be. It's very common, it grows everywhere. Nettle, of course, is very resistant, grows everywhere, comes first in spring, it's ready to go. The roots are resistant because it keeps multiplying, stingy, strong, it has iron inside, builds the blood, etc., etc. Right? It's a Martian essence. Yeah, I can give a lot of other examples with different planets, but I think you understand the idea. Yeah, and so through the birth chart of somebody, you can read into the archetypes that are stronger or weaker in somebody and how these interact with each other. You can also read that in the pulse, and you can also read it in how somebody presents themselves when you're very well acquainted with the archetypes of the planets, right? And then here we go back to reading the book of nature, right? When you know the main building blocks of nature in traditional European medicine, and then definitely in Hermetic alchemy, astrology. So the planets are so, so important. They keep going through and through and through. And again, Paracelsus, who kind of built modern chemistry, so modern pharmacology. If you read any of his works, you will definitely find the name of a planet couple minutes into reading, whatever it is that you're reading. There's so much that's important there. So these are really understood as the archetypal building blocks. And when you know those, when you acquaint yourselves well with those, you can read the book of nature. That means you can understand what correspondence a plant has without even knowing, because you've read or you've learned that, oh yeah, okay, nettle is good for the blood because it has iron, right? Like maybe you don't know that, but maybe you can see, wow, this plant that maybe you've never seen before really has this, warrior-like quality. It must be building for someone's drive, right? For someone's vitality, which of course lies in the blood. Yeah, so I hope that I'm explaining this clearly, that you understand how these things come together, and then you know as well that this is within this person, within this plant. You know how to apply it. So the same goes, of course, for minerals and for metals and for seasons and for places, and of course also for body parts and for organs, like you see in this image. Yeah. So a lot of what alchemy and medical astrology does, and a lot of traditional European medicine in general, honestly, is it doesn't just take what we see at face value, right? It understand there are these invisible forces, which of course we archaically also call the gods, that are infused throughout everything, right? And this is such a beautiful image that just tells that story again and again and again. Yeah. And then, of course, we also have kind of the grandmother's wisdom, which is often thought of as well when we think of traditional European medicine. For example, a grandmother's wisdom is that spider webs can be used to stop bleeding wounds, right? So next time that you have a spider web around and you might be bleeding, but you might not have anything um, to put on it to stop the wound. For example, you can use spider webs. You can also use a poultice of yarrow, but those are kind of grandmother's wisdoms. Or that you put egg white in your eye when you have an eye infection or when you have redness in the white part of your eye, or garlic soup, right? Or plantain, yarrow being chewed on when you see them and spit out in order to heal wounds or to stop bleeding of wounds. These are these ingrained wisdoms that all of our ancestors have. They have just, it's not so long ago relative to the history of our people that our ancestors have stopped to really transmit it, right? Right now, we're kind of in the reality that there's one generation missing. So often our grandmothers and definitely our great grandmothers still knew a lot of these folk remedies. But in some European countries more than others. So in some it's more preserved, specifically more towards the east. But I don't want to generalize, but that is kind of how we see it. There's definitely exceptions, as with everything. But it seems that in this last kind of generation, so the boomer generation of my parents, they were in this modern world where industrialization was the reality and modern medicine was the new big thing, vaccines, right? That was the important thing, and a lot got put to the side. So I definitely understand us to have a responsibility, all of us, even if you're not working in this field with clients, it doesn't matter. You have a life, you have health, you have friends, you have family, right? That we all work to retrieve this knowledge from within our own lines, from our own families. If you have the fortune that your grandparents, maybe even your great grandparents are still alive, I wholeheartedly invite you to sit with them and to ask them for their folk wisdoms from in a medical way, and ideally to also record them, write them down, right? That you can also pass that on to your children if your grandparents are still alive, or maybe your neighbor who might be an old lady. Ask these people, write them down, right? Often what they say is actually quite helpful, even though it might seem minor. This is our cultural heritage as well, and a lot of it has unfortunately been lost, but luckily a lot has been retained as well. So yeah, traditional medicine is a form of ancestral medicine too, right? Our ancestors have lived with this, and they can share with us a lot to do in certain situations, and also how to assess whether something that has been recommended for us is helpful or not. Yeah. So of course, here we have the role of ritual in order to connect to our ancestors, to the ones who are more ancient, right? So we'll take a little break, and when we come back, I would say in 5 minutes, so almost at the hour, 2 minutes before the hour, we'll come back and then we'll have a ritual. I'll guide you through a ritual in order for you to connect to a well and wise ancestor who you could ask for some learning in folk medicine. All right. So first we'll do a drop-in, a grounding, a connecting, a clearing, and a protecting. And then we'll take a moment to first face the north, the place of your mother's father's people, and then the east, the place of your father's people, then the south, the place of your mother's father's people, and then the west, the place of your mother's people. And I'll invite you, don't have to remember this, don't worry, I'm guiding you. And then I'll invite you to take an assessment of which line feels the safest and most nourishing to connect to for now. And then you'll take time. It'll take half an hour to do this. And then the intention with this is to connect, as I said, with a well and wise ancestor who can teach you about traditional and folk medicine that your ancestral line has been using. All right, welcome back. I invite you just to take a little minute to get settled. So maybe that might mean closing your door, switching off your phone or your notifications, getting comfortable, getting a pillow. Just do what it is that you need to do to get comfortable so that you can drop in just a minute. And when you're comfortable and ready, I invite you to start with taking 10 deep breaths in and out to your belly. Allow your out breath to deepen, to lengthen. And allow yourself to really arrive in your body, on your chair, or pillow, or carpet, or sofa, whatever it is that you're sitting on. Take a moment to notice the contact between your body and the earth. It can be helpful to take some out breaths where you leave a little sigh of release. Ah. And from this more grounded place, I invite you to take a moment to connect to a force which is greater than you, which you trust. Maybe it's the power of the sea, or the wind, or fire. Or maybe it's a particular guide, or totem, or animal that you work with. Take some moments to connect with them and to invite them into your space. And I invite you, once they're there, to ask them to clear and clean the space around you, your personal space and the space of the room in which you currently find yourself. Take a moment as well to ask them to create a little layer of protection around this clean and cleared space. From this place, I invite you to face to the north, the place of your mother's fathers. And I invite you, without connecting with them, to just get a little assessment around how safe and nourishing it feels to connect into this line. I invite you now to turn and to face to the east. Don't worry, you don't have to face the actual directional east. Just within your mind's eye, turn to the east. Place of your father's fathers, and take here a moment as well to feel in to the general wellness of this line and how called you may feel to connect here. Face also to the south now, to the place of your mother's fathers. Take a moment to assess as well whether these may be the ones that you will connect with for today. And lastly, I invite you to face to the west, the place of your mother's people, and similarly assess whether these may be the ones that you will connect to further today. Trusting your guidance, trusting your intuition, and making a decision of which line is the safest and most nourishing to connect to for now, with the aim to meet a well and wise ancestor who can teach you about folk medicine. Okay. Now turning the direction of this line that you chose, north, your mother's fathers, east, your father's fathers, south, your mother's fathers, and west, your mother's mothers. Turning to the direction of the line you will connect to. And holding the intention in your heart to meet a well and wise, ancient, not a recent, ancient ancestor on this line of your ancestry, calling them forth. asking them what it is they may have to share about folk medicine practiced according to your ancestral line. Asking them what the tools or the herbs were and are. Asking them whether there's anything in particular which is relevant to your health and your well-being right now that they can share with you. Slowly transitioning into thanking them for showing up, for the generosity of their share. Just taking your time to be in honor and reverence to this well and wise one. And slowly shifting back out of ritual into your room, into the space in which you find yourself, connecting again to your body, to this present moment, to the circle in which we find ourselves together. Please take the time to go over what it is that you received, perhaps with your eyes still closed. And whenever you feel ready, I invite you to shift directly to writing this journey down. Take your time to write as much detail as you need. I will say my goodbye already. I thank you all for your interest in traditional European medicine, for being here, for your trust. Blessings to your ancestors. Blessings to those well and wise ones. And blessing to this wisdom that flows through all of us from them. May they be heard. May we pass on their wisdom for a life of health, balance, inspiration, fulfillment, and well-being together. Much love to you all. May you be well.